Case 1. Tiffany Moss. October 28, 2013. Gwinnett County Superior Court, Georgia. Every county has a case its investigators never forget. The one that changes how a community looks at the people living quietly next door. In Gwinnett County, Georgia, that case belongs to a 10-year-old girl named Imani Moss, and to the woman the state would eventually hold responsible for the end of her life. This is a story about a child welfare system that had chances to intervene, about neighbors who noticed something was wrong and said nothing, and about a courtroom where the defendant chose to represent herself and offered no defense at all. It is not a story we tell for shock value. It is a story we tell because Imani Moss deserves to be remembered by name, and because understanding how a child can slip through every safety net available to her is the first step toward making sure it happens less often. Imani Gabrielle Moss was born in April of 2003. By the fall of 2013, she was living with her father, Iman Moss, and her stepmother, Tiffany Moss, in an apartment complex in Lawrenceville, a suburb northeast of Atlanta. To the outside world, the household looked unremarkable. Inside, according to court testimony, Imani had been enduring severe and prolonged neglect for years. Investigators later learned that concerns had been raised about Imani's welfare more than once before her passing. In 2010, Tiffany Moss had already pleaded guilty to a charge of child abuse involving Imani and was placed on probation. In 2012, Imani's school reported signs of emotional distress to state child welfare authorities. A caller reported to the same agency, months before Imani's passing, that she appeared dangerously thin. According to family members who later pursued civil action against the state's child welfare agency, those warnings were not followed up on with the urgency they deserved. By October of 2013, Imani's body had wasted to a fraction of what it should have been for a child her age. On October the 28th, she did not survive. Rather than seeking help, the adults responsible for her attempted to conceal what had happened. Imani's body was placed inside a galvanized steel trash can and set on fire in an apparent effort to destroy evidence. It would be several more days, until November the 2nd, before investigators located her remains at the apartment complex. What followed was one of the most difficult prosecutions Gwinnett County had seen. District Attorney Danny Porter, who worked the case personally, would later describe it as among the worst instances of child cruelty his office had encountered. Iman Moss, Imani's father, ultimately entered a guilty plea in 2015 in exchange for his cooperation as a witness against his wife, and he is currently serving a life sentence. Tiffany Moss chose a different path. In April of 2019, as her capital murder trial began in Gwinnett County Superior Court, Moss elected to represent herself. She called no witnesses. She cross-examined no one. She offered no opening statement and no closing argument. Prosecutors, meanwhile, built a methodical case using medical evidence, DFCS records, and the testimony of Imani's father, who described in detail the suffering Imani endured in her final months, including extreme isolation and the systemic withholding of food, even as the household's other children were reportedly fed and cared for normally. The jury took less than 3 hours to convict Moss on all counts, including malice murder, felony murder, first-degree cruelty to children, and concealing the death of another. Days later, the same panel of 6 men and 6 women returned with a unanimous sentence: death. Tiffany Moss showed no visible reaction as the verdict was read. She remains, to this day, the only woman on Georgia's death row, and just the 3rd woman in the state's history to be sentenced to die for a crime. Cases like Imani's are part of why organizations such as Child Help and the National Child Abuse Hotline exist, to give any child or any adult who suspects a child is in danger a way to reach someone before it is too late. If you are ever concerned about a child's safety, reaching out is never the wrong choice. We've noticed that most of you watching haven't subscribed to Cold Case Hour yet. Before we move on to the next case, take just 2 seconds to make sure you're subscribed so you never miss another gripping true crime documentary. If you're enjoying the stories we bring you, don't forget to like this video and leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Case 2. Falicia Blakely. August 15th through August 16th, 2002. DeKalb County Superior Court, Georgia. Some of the most disturbing cases in Georgia's legal history are not simple stories of good and evil. They are stories about how vulnerability, manipulation, and violence can become tangled together until it is difficult to say where victimhood ends and culpability begins. Falicia Blakely's case is one of those stories, and it remains one of the most debated in Georgia true crime history. In the summer of 2002, Falicia Blakely was just 18 years old, working as an exotic dancer in Atlanta. According to court records and later reporting, she had become involved with an older man named Michael Berry, who functioned as her pimp and, prosecutors say, exerted significant coercive control over her life. Blakely had already lost custody of her young child by this point and had returned to sex work, reportedly under Berry's direction. On the night of August the 15th, 2002, Blakely and an accomplice, Tasmiyah Irvin, went to the apartment of 34-year-old Raymond Goodwin, where 35-year-old Claudel Christmas was also present. What began as an evening built around companionship turned violent. Both men lost their lives that night, shot in Goodwin's apartment. Less than 12 hours later, in the early morning hours of August the 16th, Blakely and Irvin lured a third man, 29-year-old Lametrius Twitty, away from a nightclub in Buckhead into his apartment in Clarkston. He, too, did not survive the encounter. Investigators say the pattern was calculated. Young women befriending men who appeared to be carrying cash, then acting under direction to rob them, with fatal violence following each robbery. The spree ended a week later when Blakely and Irvin were arrested at a diner called Mrs. Winter's, where a suspicious restaurant employee had alerted police. They were found in one of the victim's stolen vehicles. DeKalb County prosecutors initially sought the death penalty against Blakely. Facing that possibility, she entered a guilty plea in January of 2004, admitting that she had personally fired the fatal shots in each case. Her account, both at the time and in interviews afterward, was that she had acted entirely under threat and manipulation from Berry, whom she described as someone who had systematically isolated her and convinced her that violence was the only way to survive their relationship. Superior Court Judge Clarence Seliger sentenced Blakely to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Her co-defendant, Tasmiyah Irvin, who cooperated with prosecutors and testified against Blakely, received a more lenient sentence with parole eligibility after 14 years. Blakely, now in her 40s, remains incarcerated in Georgia today. Her case has since been the subject of a television film and continued public conversation about coercive control, exploitation, and how the justice system weighs culpability when a defendant argues she was, in some sense, also a victim. Organizations that support survivors of exploitation and trafficking, including the National Human Trafficking Hotline, exist for exactly these situations. For anyone who feels trapped in a relationship built on control and fear, there is a way out, and help is available. We've noticed that most of you watching haven't subscribed to Cold Case Hour yet. Before we move on to the next case, take just 2 seconds to make sure you're subscribed so you never miss another gripping true crime documentary. If you're enjoying the stories we bring you, don't forget to like this video and leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Case 3. Joyce Marie Pelzer. September 25, 2011, and December of 2018. DeKalb County Superior Court and Rockdale County Superior Court, Georgia. Cold cases have a way of resurfacing when investigators least expect it, often because of events that seem, at first, completely unrelated. That is exactly what happened in the case of Joyce Marie Pelzer, a case that spans nearly a decade, 2 counties, and 2 women whose fates became permanently intertwined. On September the 25th, 2011, 35-year-old Shondell McLeod failed to show up for work in the Atlanta area. Her mother reported her missing that same day. Investigators with the DeKalb County Police Department soon learned that McLeod had recently ended a relationship with Joyce Marie Pelzer, a relationship family and friends described as troubled and at times frightening. Just months earlier, Pelzer had reportedly been the subject of an arrest warrant after allegedly threatening McLeod with a knife. When police located McLeod's car abandoned in southeast Atlanta, they found a tarp and a spare tire in the back seat, along with damage and mud consistent with the vehicle having been somewhere far from the city. McLeod herself, however, was nowhere to be found. Her body has never been recovered. The case went cold for years. Then, in 2018, an entirely separate case broke it open. Pelzer had by then married a woman named Rosalind Lewis. When Lewis filed for divorce that December, A new partner of Pelzer's contacted DeKalb police to warn them that Pelzer intended to harm Lewis. Officers with the Conyers Police Department, responding to a Rockdale County motel days later, found Lewis suffering from more than 30 stab wounds. She did not survive. Pelzer fled the scene and led Georgia State Patrol troopers on a highway pursuit that ended when a pit maneuver forced her vehicle to spin out. A brief exchange of gunfire followed, and Pelzer was wounded and taken into custody. In the days that followed, from a hospital bed, she gave investigators new information that reopened the 7-year-old McLeod case entirely, telling them that Lewis had, in fact, helped orchestrate McLeod's presumed death years earlier, and that the two of them, along with an alleged hired accomplice, had buried McLeod in the woods of North Georgia. In January of 2021, Pelzer pleaded guilty in Rockdale County to malice murder, felony murder, and aggravated assault in connection with Rosalind Lewis's passing, and received a life sentence with the possibility of parole. Nearly 3 years later, in December of 2023, a DeKalb County jury convicted her separately of the 2011 disappearance and presumed murder of Shondell McLeod. A judge sentenced her to an additional term of life without the possibility of parole for that conviction. Despite an extensive search using cadaver dogs at Arabia Mountain in 2019, McLeod's remains have never been located, leaving her family without the one thing they have wanted most, to bring her home. For families still searching for missing loved ones, resources like the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, known as NAMUS, exist to help connect cold cases with the answers families deserve. We've noticed that most of you watching haven't subscribed to Cold Case Hour yet. Before we move on to the next case, take just 2 seconds to make sure you're subscribed so you never miss another gripping true crime documentary. If you're enjoying the stories we bring you, don't forget to like this video and leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Case 4. Tasmiyah Whitehead. January 13, 2010. Rockdale County Superior Court, Georgia. Not every case in this series involves calculation or years of premeditation. Some of the most heartbreaking cases are the ones born out of chaos. Years of family conflict that finally erupted with irreversible consequences. That is the story of 16-year-old identical twins Tasmiyah and Jasmiyah Whitehead, and the tragic end of their mother's life in Conyers, Georgia. Jarmeka Nikki Whitehead was 34 years old, raising her twin daughters largely on her own, and by all accounts, the relationship between mother and daughters had been strained for years. Court records describe a pattern of conflict going back to at least 2008, when police were called to the family's home in response to a physical altercation. Custody of the twins had shifted more than once between their mother and their great-grandmother in the years that followed. On the morning of January 13, 2010, the twins, then 16 years old, woke up late for school. According to the account Tasmiyah eventually gave investigators years later, an argument broke out in the kitchen after their mother became upset about the missed bus. The confrontation escalated quickly. A kitchen utensil was thrown. A kitchen knife entered the fight. What had begun as a shouting match between a mother and her daughters ended with Nikki Whitehead losing her life in her own home, her body later found by responding officers in the bathtub. For nearly 4 years, the true story of what happened that morning remained hidden. The twins initially told police they had come home to find their mother already gone, and one of them flagged down a passing sheriff's deputy to report what appeared to be a break-in. It would not be until 2014, after DNA testing cleared an initial boyfriend suspect and mounting evidence pointed toward the twins themselves, that Tasmiyah changed her account and admitted her role in the fight that claimed her mother's life. In January of 2014, Tasmiyah Whitehead pleaded guilty in Rockdale County Superior Court to voluntary manslaughter, along with charges of falsifying a statement to a government entity and possession of a knife during the commission of a crime, reduced from the original felony murder charge she had faced. Chief Superior Court Judge David Irwin, calling the case a tragedy of epic proportions, sentenced her to 30 years in prison. Her sister Jasmiyah would enter an identical plea 1 month later and receive the same sentence. Both women, now in their 30s, remain incarcerated in Georgia, with parole eligibility on the horizon in the coming years. Family conflict that escalates to violence is, tragically, more common than many people realize, which is why resources like the National Domestic Violence Hotline exist for any family, parents and children alike, who feel a situation at home may be spiraling beyond their control. We've noticed that most of you watching haven't subscribed to Cold Case Hour yet. Before we move on to the next case, take just 2 seconds to make sure you're subscribed so you never miss another gripping true crime documentary. If you're enjoying the stories we bring you, don't forget to like this video and leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Case 5. Kelly Renee Gissendaner. February 7, 1997. Gwinnett County Superior Court, Georgia. Our final case is, in many ways, the one that started this entire conversation about women and Georgia's death penalty. It is the case of Kelly Renee Gissendaner, the only woman executed by the state of Georgia in the modern era, and a case that, even a decade after it concluded, continues to divide legal scholars, faith leaders, and the public. Kelly Gissendaner and her husband, Douglas Gissendaner, had a complicated marital history. They married, divorced, and remarried one another before things fell apart for good. By early 1997, Kelly had begun a relationship with another man, Gregory Owen, and prosecutors say she made the decision that she wanted her marriage to end permanently and profitably, rather than through the courts. On the night of February the 7th, 1997, Kelly arranged to be seen in public, spending the evening with friends and going dancing at a local venue in Gwinnett County, ensuring she had an alibi for what was about to happen. Meanwhile, Gregory Owen was waiting inside the home Kelly shared with Douglas. When Douglas arrived and began closing the door behind him, Owen confronted him, forced him back into his own car at knife point, and directed him to drive to a remote, wooded area off Luke Edwards Road in Gwinnett County. There, prosecutors say, following the plan Kelly herself had helped design, Owen attacked Douglas, and he did not survive. Kelly's involvement did not end with the planning. According to trial testimony, she met Owen at the scene afterward, and the two of them set fire to Douglas's car in an effort to destroy evidence before Kelly returned to her friends and continued the evening as though nothing had happened. In the days that followed, as Douglas was reported missing, Kelly gave investigators inconsistent and ultimately false information, and friends who later testified said she showed little visible concern about her husband's disappearance, a detail prosecutors would use to argue she had known his fate all along because she had orchestrated it. Gregory Owen was offered a plea deal. In exchange for pleading guilty and testifying against Kelly, he would receive a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 25 years, avoiding the death penalty entirely, despite being the one who physically carried out the killing. Kelly Gissendaner refused a plea and went to trial. In November of 1998, a Gwinnett County jury convicted her of malice murder and determined that, as the mastermind of the plot, she bore ultimate responsibility. She was sentenced to death. What followed was one of the longest and most closely watched death penalty appeals processes in recent Georgia history. 2 scheduled execution dates were postponed, one due to a winter storm, another after officials discovered irregularities in the lethal injection drugs to be used. During her years on death row, Gissendaner became known for a personal transformation that drew national attention. She pursued theological studies through a prison education program, corresponded with a well-known Christian ethicist, and became, by the accounts of chaplains and fellow inmates, a source of counsel and support to other incarcerated women. Her adult children pleaded publicly with the parole board for clemency, while members of Douglas's family argued just as forcefully that the sentence handed down by a jury of her peers should stand. A retired Georgia Supreme Court justice took the unusual step of publicly stating that, whatever one believed about the death penalty generally, the disparity between Gissendaner's sentence and Owen's life term made her case, in his view, unjust. None of the appeals succeeded. On September 30th, 2015, Kelly Renee Gissendaner was executed by lethal injection at the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison, the first woman executed by the state of Georgia in 70 years, and to date, the only woman actually put to death since the reinstatement of the modern death penalty. Gregory Owen remains incarcerated, with parole eligibility that has already passed. Her case remains a touchstone in the broader national conversation about proportionality in capital sentencing, about how the justice system weighs the person who plans a crime against the person who carries it out, and whether personal transformation behind bars should ever factor into decisions about who lives and who does not. If today's cases have raised questions for you about the death penalty, victim advocacy, or the justice system more broadly, organizations like the Death Penalty Information Center offer factual, nonpartisan resources for anyone who wants to understand these issues more deeply. We've noticed that most of you watching haven't subscribed to Cold Case Hour yet.